All right, today I wanted to talk to you guys about psychoanalytic literary theory and how it applies to children's books, specifically Dr. Seuss books. Psychoanalytic literary theory is influenced by the tradition of Austrian psychoanalyst Dr. Sigmund Freud, and psychoanalytic literary theory has been practiced since Freud developed his psychoanalytic theories in the early 1900s. In its simplest form, psychoanalytic literary theory can be thought of as a psychoanalysis of the author, and so psychoanalytic literary theory can provide useful clues to the sometimes confusing actions or settings of a particular piece of literature. So Freud, as you may know, wrote many books and papers on dreams and how dreams are the key to unlocking the subconscious. So Freud thought of works of fiction as simply an author's dream. Freud thought of literary texts as repressing real content behind the visible content. And so you could say that a psychoanalytic literary theory involves analyzing the language and the symbolism of a literary work to reverse the process of a dream and arrive at the author's underlying thoughts. So even though Freud is considered a pioneer in the field of psychoanalysis, many of the original ideas that he had have been found to be incorrect or at least exaggerated. Many modern psychoanalytic theories are based on Freud's original ideas, however, and many of Freud's theories, such as the Oedipus complex and the psychic apparatus, which is the id, ego, and superego, they've been what's called non-falsifiable, and so that basically means that there's not enough proof to say that they're correct, but also there's not enough evidence to disprove it either. So in the 1960s, French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan expanded and refined some of Freud's work until it became basically a separate movement. So some people called it Lacanianism after him. But Lacan himself famously said, and I quote, "It is up to you to be Lacanians if you wish, but I'm a Freudian." Regardless of what you call it, the work of Lacan is what moved psychoanalytic theory from modernity to postmodernity. And psychoanalytic theory has been used by theorists that were influenced by Lacan's reformulation of Freud's work in post-structural thought, where the focus is on the split and fragmented nature of identity as manifested through a repressed subconscious. So let's talk about Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss's real name was Ted Geisel. He wrote over 60 children's books under the pen name Dr. Seuss. So Ted Geisel was born and raised in the United States by two German immigrants, and so he took a break from children's literature to work for the animation department of the United States Army during World War II. And these experiences with war would influence some of his later works, as we will soon see. I'll use psychoanalytic literary theory to talk about a few of his books. So Geisel, basically made a point of not beginning his stories with a moral in mind. Geisel has been quoted as saying, "There is an inherent moral to every story." He was often coy about revealing any hidden meanings, and he wanted to leave it up to the reader to interpret his books how you wish. Geisel was married twice, but never had any children, and so many people might find it strange that such a great children's entertainer didn't have any kids. If you look closely at the artwork in Geisel's books, you'll notice right away that there's very few straight lines. Even the buildings and machines that he drew were curvy, and the characters often had droopy faces. And so Freudian theorists would suggest that Geisel drawing all these curvy and wavy lines was basically a projection of his own impotence. Is there any truth to that? I guess we'll never know. So I want to start with the book Hop on Pop. It was published in 1963, and perhaps one of the most obvious elements of Freudian psychoanalytic theory is with this book, Hop on Pop. So, first off, there's the obvious pedophilic implication with the phrase Hop on Pop. Fortunately, the picture in the book is a lot less creepy. In addition, Freudians would argue that Hop on Pop conveys the classic Oedipal complex, where the children think that the father is the enemy in preventing them from realizing some deeply ingrained desire for their mothers. Is that what Geisel really intended when he wrote Hop on Pop? I guess we'll never know for sure. A little bit later on in the book, there's a character, Mr. Brown, who appears to be having a homosexual affair, cheating on his wife with Mr. Black. I know, it sounds crazy, right? But look at the book. You will find the caption, Mr. Brown, Mrs. Brown, with a picture of the couple. Both are smiling, but they're showing no physical intimacy at all. In fact, they're not even touching. A little bit later on, Mr. Brown appears to have a little adventure. We first read the question, "Where is Brown? There is Brown. Mr. Brown is out of town." Not a big deal, but then we read Brown came back. Brown came back with Mr. Black. So, this time Mr. Brown and Mr. Black are shown arm in arm in a display of intimacy that was denied to Mrs. Brown. In fact, Mrs. Brown seems to be gone forever because later on Mr. Brown and Mr. Black are having a picnic, and it doesn't appear Mrs. Brown was invited. How the Grinch Stole Christmas is one of a very popular books for sure. The original How the Grinch Stole Christmas was written by Ted Geisel in 1957 and tells the story of a grouchy Grinch who tried to put an end to Christmas by stealing everything from the houses of the nearby village of Whoville on Christmas Eve. Despite his efforts, the Whovillians still celebrated Christmas, and so the Grinch decides to return everything that he stole, and he becomes the guest of honor at the Who's Christmas feast. As far as psychoanalytic theory goes, it seems the Grinch was projecting his own feelings of disappointment and depression onto the Who's. He figures by taking the commercialism out of Christmas, the Who's will be sad like him. How the Grinch Stole Christmas, obviously it has a moral of anti-consumerism, anti-capitalism, anti-commercialism, whatever you want to call it. And many people think that the Grinch is a self-portrait of Geisel, so I found many references to that. So literary historian Charles Cohen noted that Geisel was quirky, antisocial, and avoided crowds. And so after he made a lot of money, Ted Geisel actually bought a house on a mountain overlooking the town of La Jolla, California, which could be considered a stand-in for Whoville, I guess. What's more is that the Grinch made a comment in the book, "For 53 years I've put up with it now." And what's interesting is Geisel was actually 53 years old when he wrote the book. And Geisel's characters are rarely given any ages, so it's not likely to be a coincidence, I don't think. All right, The Cat in the Hat is a classic for sure. It was written in 1954. The story begins with two bored latchkey children waiting for their mother to come home on a rainy day. Freud claims that... Sigmund Freud claimed that everybody's personality contained three pieces, which he called the psychic apparatus, also known as the id, the ego, and the superego. So in this book, the cat is clearly the id because he reacts to his impulses without thinking about the consequences and is not influenced by social norms. And the fish, on the other hand, is obviously the superego because the fish represents the moral conscience of the kids, and is in constant conflict with the id, or the cat in this case. The narrator is a little boy. He's not given a name in the story, but he's the narrator, and he basically represents the ego in Freud's psychic apparatus because he's trying to maintain balance between the cat and the fish. Or in other words, the primal impulses and the moral compass. Was Geisel thinking about Freud's psychic apparatus when he wrote the book in 1954? I guess we'll never know for sure, but the similarities are remarkable. Geisel was known for micromanaging every detail of his books, even personally selecting the exact colors to use and precise placement of text on the pages. It's hard to believe he would create these similarities accidentally. All right, Horton Hears a Who tells the story of Horton the elephant, and who discovers a microscopic colony of people called Whoville on a speck of dust. He puts the speck on a clover for safekeeping. Later on, an eagle steals the clover, flying it a long distance away and then dropping it. Horton Hears a Who was written in 1954, and it appears to be an allegorical account of the Hiroshima bombing and the post-war occupation of Japan. The symbolism used with the eagle is unmistakable since the eagle is a national symbol of the United States, and after the clover had been dropped, Horton finally finds it, and the mayor of Whoville exclaims, "When the black-bottomed birdie let go and we dropped, we landed so hard that our clocks have all stopped." This line would seem to represent a nuclear bombing of Japan in 1945. All right, Yertle the Turtle was released in 1958. It tells the story of King Yertle, who is not happy with the rock that serves as his throne. So he gets the other turtles to stack on top of each other, and so that King Yertle can stand on the top and see farther, thus expanding his own kingdom. So Mac is the name of the turtle at the bottom of the stack, and he suffers the most. Yertle refuses to give him a break, and so finally Mac decides that he's had enough, lets out a big burp, toppling the stack of turtles and leaving King Yertle in the mud, thus freeing all the other turtles in the stack. This story is very easy to psychoanalyze because Geisel himself has said that the title character Yertle represented Adolf Hitler. And Yertle's ruthless rule of the pond and the takeover of the surrounding area parallel Hitler's regime in Germany and his invasion of various parts of Europe afterwards. Geisel worked as a propaganda cartoonist for the U.S. military during World War II and often caricatured Hitler. The last line of the book reads, "All the turtles are free, all turtles as maybe all creatures should be." History professor Richard Manier from UMass Amherst notes that line, it provides readers with a moral without sounding too preachy, and it also goes under the anti-teaching radar of many children. Since Geisel wrote more than 60 children's books, one could go on all day trying to psychoanalyze the author and the characters, but I think I've given you a good start with this presentation. I find it fascinating because the books really do seem to transcend generations. I remember reading these books when I grew up in the 80s, and I remember reading these books to my younger brother in the 90s, and now I'm reading these books to my own children. And even after all this time, there's still things that I notice in these books that I didn't notice before. So Ted Geisel's books have become something of a historical anthology, I would say. In many ways, you can read the books as a commentary on political issues of the day. Instead of ending with a happily ever after, Dr. Seuss books often, like the Lorax, Yertle the Turtle, for example, often end with an element of uncertainty. So, according to Philip Nell, who we know from this course, this encourages the reader to take up the actively critical elements in each book, and I hope after watching this, you will consider taking up these causes too. Thank you.